How's it going, everyone? Welcome into GDT Live. Today, we are bringing on Zach Laing from the Oilers Nation boys over at OilersNation.com. We're going to talk to him about the Oilers offseason, the draft. I'm going to talk to him about Tommy Lafreniere back there. And then we're going to bring on Felix Sicard. He works for, doesn't work for the Anaheim Ducks, but he has a podcast called Crashing the Pond, does great stuff over there. So we're going to bring him on, talk a bunch about the Anaheim Ducks because they've been busy as well. But without further ado, let's bring on Zach and get talking about some Oilers stuff. Hello, Zach. Thank you for joining me today. What's going on in Oilerland today?
Hey, Colton. Thanks again for having me. It's been a couple of weeks since we've had a chat. Oilerland, It's kind of interesting these days. It's kind of somewhat of a bit of a barren wasteland for the news cycle right now. Obviously, it's kind of nice getting the Ike Howard trade last week. That sent a little bit of energy into everything going on here. But between you and me, Colton, I'm kind of hoping it's a quiet rest of the summer for the Edmonton Oilers. Last year, of course, in August, we had all of the drama surrounding the offer sheets for Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg, and it kind of took away my off season from me. So I'm still a little bit bitter about it. So I'm like, you know what? Let's just save it for September. If there's any Oilers news, let's break it in September, guys.
Just have not Ken anymore, but who's the president? Jeff Jackson?
Jeff Jackson, CEO. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. So get him just to, relax a little bit. Just go to the cabin, go to the cottage, hang out. Let everybody have a good summer.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the draft. I've been texting you a bunch about Tommy Lafreniere. You know how high I am on him. Wrote a little something for you guys over at Oilers Nation about him as well. What have you made of Tommy so far? And have you had a chance to kind of watch some of his highlights?
Admittedly, I'm not a huge prospect guy, so I don't really do a ton of following them or watching or stuff like that. But I think this is kind of a bit of an interesting draft class for the Edmonton Oilers here. It's pretty clear that they were looking for some guys who could definitely be some longer term projects. I feel like that's what Lafreniere is here. Other guys like David Lewandowski, a German guy there. You always love to see that connection with Leon Draisaitl being in the Oilers organization, right? Asher Barrett, the Oilers trade up for him in the 5th round. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say that, I know much about any of these guys, but I always find it interesting when you see a team trading up later in the round, later in a draft to grab a guy. So intrigued to see there. This goaltender, Daniel Salonen, I think is arguably the most intriguing one for me, I think, of this entire draft class. I mean, this guy had an absolutely incredible season last year, for the U20 team, for U20 out in Finland last year, playing in, what is it again? Luko, their U20 team. I mean, this guy's numbers were absolutely incredible last season. He had a 23-1 record, a 933 save percentage, 1.55 goals against average. He was tremendous over there. So interesting to see what you got there. And then, a good prospect, depth guy, Nathan Park, with the last pick of the draft. Or second last pick of the draft. And the guy was still hanging around the draft. I mean, I thought that was really cool. Like, you don't really see that a whole lot. So kind of interesting draft class. But I mean, for the Oilers, these days when it comes to drafting, they're kind of looking for the diamonds in the roughs, right? I mean, they're trading so many of their early picks here over the last number of years. Obviously, in 2024, they move up to grab Sam O'Reilly, 32nd overall. But that's the first round pick the Oilers had since 2022 when they took Reed Schaefer, who was promptly traded 8 months later. So not a lot of these guys sticking around in the Oilers system.
You said diamond in the rough, and I think that perfectly encapsulates Tommy Lafreniere and how he is. I have a lot of bias, of course, because I work for the Blazers, but I think that he is without a doubt a diamond in the rough prospect. He's a kid who played his first full season last year after having just 7 games back in 2023-24, and he was almost point per game this year. He's a player that you can definitely tell there's high IQ, good offensive awareness. He's not afraid to kind of get in there into the grimy spots and, dig the puck out. He reminds me of Nick Suzuki, I guess, is like the best way to put it. And that's what an NHL scout has told me as well. So I think that he is a player that, like give him that development and we'll see how things go in 3 to 5 years, but definitely a player to watch out for in the Oilers system. Another player that I was very high on in the Oilers system was Sam O'Reilly, but now he is out the door, gone to Tampa Bay. What did you make of the trade for Ike Howard?
Utterly fascinating, to be completely honest with you. The Oilers were clearly after this guy for some time. I mean, there was talk about, from Frank Saravalli, at the draft that, the Oilers, it sounded like it was a done deal. It was going to be a first round pick for Ike Howard, straight up 1-for-1. Obviously that didn't come to fruition. And I think what's interesting too is like, the Oilers don't have a first round pick in 2026. Their next one is in 2027. So, if you realistically think about it, or the way that I was looking at it, I suppose, was okay, a 2027 first round pick that's going to be, let's say, 28th to 32nd overall, somewhere in that range, given the Oilers' ability to make these deep cup runs, that's still a guy who's going to be 3-4 years away from helping you. So we're looking at 5 years from now, that player may be making an impact in the NHL. So I was all for trading that pick for Ike Howard. I think what's interesting about the Sam O'Reilly angle is that, in my opinion, the Oilers are essentially just expediting the development process here. You're getting a guy in Ike Howard who's a couple of years older, who fits a little bit better as to what the Oilers really need right now in terms of, wingers. And obviously, I mean, it goes without saying here that this guy is completely unproven. He had a tremendous season last year in Michigan State, won the Hobey Baker. There's no denying how good he was last season, but the pro game's a completely different animal. And what we know about Ike Howard, he's a sharpshooter. He's a smart player who can get to the right spots in the offensive zone. And to be totally honest, like that's what the Oilers need in their top six. I mean, they don't really have like a pure goal scorer in that top six. Connor McDavid obviously can fill the net. Leon Draisaitl obviously can fill the net. But even Draisaitl has developed more into like a really high-end two-way center where he's playing the best defensive hockey that he has in his entire career. And obviously he's one of the best setup men in the entire NHL. Zach Hyman, I don't really look at him as necessarily like a pure goal scorer either. We saw some regression to the mean in his numbers last season, which wasn't a huge shock. For me, I think Howard is a guy who's got a really high offensive ceiling. And I think that's kind of what the Edmonton Oilers are looking for here. I like Sam O'Reilly. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think he's an NHL player in a couple of years here. But at the end of the day, like, what's the ceiling really on Sam O'Reilly? Like a third line center? Undoubtedly an important position and something that's highly coveted around the league, right? But when you look at this Oilers roster right now, bringing in Ike Howard allows the ability for Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to slide down to the third line and be the Oilers 3C. We saw it a little bit later in the season last year when the Oilers were dealing with injuries that Nugent-Hopkins kind of slid down to that third line, and he had a really nice run of producing offense from that third line, and it felt like he was producing more offense on the third line than he was on the first line alongside Connor McDavid. So I think above all else, this move for Howard not only helps, increase some offensive upside, getting a guy who's a pure sniper into that mix, but it also kind of helps round out the Oilers' depth if they do decide to go with the spine look, as I tend to call it, with McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent-Hopkins down the middle.
Do you feel that, I think you nailed it perfectly, that in the sense of Howard versus O'Reilly right now, it's about who makes the direct impact. And when you're looking at that Oilers roster and what they've been able to do the last 2 years going to the Stanley Cup final, you want somebody that's able to step in right away. Do you feel Howard, there might be a lot of expectation on Howard, though, coming in to this team?
I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say because, like, how much pressure can you put on a rookie in the NHL, right?
Yeah.
We've all known very well what has happened in Edmonton over the last, 10, 12 years here when it comes to their early draft. I mean, the last 15 years, if you want to go back to Taylor Hall, I can't believe that's, like almost 15 years ago now. I'm feeling old talking about this. But, so many times we saw these Oilers high-end rookies coming in with these massive expectations. And a lot of times they weren't necessarily able to hit that ceiling of expectations. I mean, this is a hockey rabid market here in Edmonton. I mean, there's undoubtedly going to be expectations. I think what's going to be really important here for the Edmonton Oilers is really slow playing this process with Ike Howard and Matt Savoy, especially early on in the season. Like, they got to play. They have to play. You know, something we saw with Matt Savoy was, you know, he got recalled. He looked like he was fitting really well in the top six. And then all of a sudden he was healthy scratched for kind of unknown reasons. And I wrote about it at the time. Like, this is not how you try and develop a guy in the NHL like, you know, Matt Savoy. So there has to be some kind of philosophical change, I think, here from the coaching staff and their willingness to play these young guys and letting them make mistakes in the NHL. The beauty of it is that you've got two of the best players, two of the top 5 players in the entire NHL, arguably two of the top 3 in the world, and McDavid and Draisaitl here in Edmonton. They can help cover up a lot of these mistakes that, you know, guys like Ike Howard and Matt Savoy are going to make early on in their NHL days. But, you know, for me, I really look at it and say, okay, like, we have to remember, first and foremost, these guys are rookies. There's going to be a learning curve. But in the same breath, there are going to be these expectations because they're expected to come in and play in the top 6 right away as rookies. So it's going to be a bit of a delicate balance, I think. And historically, young guys coming in playing big roles in Edmonton right away typically doesn't go very well for them or for the organization. So we'll see what happens here.
Let's talk about 2 more additions that have come through in the offseason here, and one that I really love. But Curtis Lazar, of course, and Andrew Mangiapane. I absolutely love Lazar coming home to Edmonton. I say home, of course, because he played for the Oil Kings, and I remember those days like no other. You know, the 2012 Edmonton Oil Kings team that had Henrik Samuelsson and Mitch Moroz and all those guys, Laurent Brossoit, Tristan Jarry, like, you go back and look at those teams, and Lazar was a huge part of that. So I think it's really cool to see him back in Edmonton. What do you make of Curtis Lazar returning to the Oilers, and what type of role do you see him playing?
Big fan of this move, really. I understand it's a real depth move here, but you've got a guy who, you know, coming off a pretty tough knee injury that he dealt with last year that really was hampering his game. You know, he's going to be hungry coming back and looking to reestablish himself in a sense as an NHLer. You know, his defensive metrics last year, even though his offensive game really wasn't there very much, were tremendous. You know, he rated above the 50% mark in terms of, you know, all of his underlying defensive metrics. And that's really a good thing. I mean, that's what we want to see here for this Edmonton Oilers team from their depth pieces. Obviously, we want to see some offense, but at the end of the day, it's really kind of about sawing off the opposition and then letting the big dogs kind of bark from there. You know, I think it's kind of interesting and something that not a lot of people are talking about here too. The Oilers have another guy who's very similar to Curtis Lazar in their system right now, and Noah Philp, somebody that I'm expecting to take the jump into the NHL this season. You know, big right shot center, obviously an interesting story for him, you know, coming out of U Sports, playing a pro year, stepping away, retiring for a year, coming back last year, and really looking like he didn't miss a step whatsoever. He's eligible for waivers this year. And I can't really envision a world where he slips through the cracks of waivers. He's a big body right shot center who's still only 27 years old or 28 years old. And he's a guy who's going to be very cost controlled at like $750,000 or under 800,000. I can't remember the exact number. So I think Noah Philp and Curtis Lazar are kind of going to be competing for some of those minutes down there on that fourth line. And I think it's a fine problem to have. Both guys can penalty kill. They can penalty kill well. They can both win face-offs. So it's going to be some internal competition there. But I think Philp is a guy who's absolutely going to be on this roster. And I almost see Lazar as a guy who's maybe going to play 40 or 50 games this year. Maybe not get the full 82 in, but kind of be a rotational piece with some of these depth players, because that's something we've seen Chris Knoblauch do a lot over the last number of years, is really cycle through some of those depth pieces on the bottom end of this roster on a regular basis.
What do you see the fit for Andrew Mangiapane? How do you see that, and what do you think of that? Because former Flame now goes to the Oilers. That's fun.
Yeah, it definitely is fun. You know, a guy that was a thorn in the side of the Edmonton Oilers for years when, you know, Mangiapane was on the top of his offensive game. Saw some regression last year offensively playing with the Washington Capitals, but his two most common line mates at 5-on-5 last year in Washington were none other than Lars Eller and Nick Dowd, two guys who are absolutely known for their really high offensive ceilings. And definitely not known for their offensive ceilings. But we saw some regression in Mangiapane's offensive game last year, and I think that a big part of it was kind of the role that he was being asked to play. He's going to come into Edmonton, and there's definitely going to be the expectation of him continuing his play as a two-way winger, but they're going to need some offense from him. He's going to be now 3 years removed from a shoulder injury that he even has said has kind of changed the way that he's played a little bit. So, bit of a reclamation project, I suppose. I think the thing that I like about it is it's kind of similar to Victor Arvidsson last year when the Oilers signed him. I was like, okay, he's dealt with some injuries in the past. Can we get a full 82 out of him? Can he kind of regain his step in the NHL and his offensive game? And for Victor Arvidsson, I mean, he was just a lack of consistency was the biggest issue. His numbers for the most part were relatively fine last year, but there were very long stretches where he was just an absent player. And I mean, I've heard similar things about Mangiapane as a player here, but it feels like the expectations are a little bit lower on him coming in than they were on Victor Arvidsson a year ago. So I'm intrigued by it. He's going to obviously have an opportunity to play with a really talented center, whether it's McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins. Just finding a fit for him and finding some chemistry early on, I think is going to be really important.
Hey Zach, what was your initial reaction to the Trent Frederick deal?
I was fine with it, and I still am. Yeah, absolutely. Listen, I understand the sentiment of a late 20s power forward signing a long-term contract and that blowing up. We've seen it so many times in the NHL, right, Colton? I mean, even just, you think of two off the top of my head. You go back to the 2016 class with free agents with Milan Lucic and Louis Eriksson signing their big ticket deals. The difference here for me with Trent Frederick is that, the money is really a lot lower. $3.85 million, I think, is what the number is for Trent Frederick here. It's over an 8-year term. And the truth of the matter is that like the Oilers actually structured this contract in a way that's really kind of friendly towards the team. The signing bonuses are pretty low every year, only like $1 million. The Oilers can essentially buy out this contract at any point in time and really not take a massive hit against their cap in the long-term picture. Basically, with how the buyouts work is, the first however many years the Oilers would save about $1 million, and then the penalty moving forward would only be like $1 million. Obviously, that's a worst case scenario here that the Oilers have to buy him out or something like that. But I think Frederick's a guy who's going to be hungry to really make his impact here on this Edmonton Oilers team. They acquired him last year ahead of the trade deadline and the double retention deal with New Jersey and Boston. And he was injured, right? He had a high ankle sprain that he was dealing with from his time in Boston. And, he came back into the lineup, a little later in the season against the LA Kings, kind of got hurt on his first shift, didn't play another regular season game, and then stepped into the lineup in the playoffs right away. And I think it was pretty clear that he was still injured all throughout the playoffs. I mean, there just wasn't really a whole lot of jump in his game on a regular basis. He still found ways to contribute, physical presence, within the lineup for sure. And there were some good things that we saw from him, but just didn't feel like the Trent Frederick that the others were kind of expecting. So I think he's got the opportunity here to take a big step forward in his own game. Again, another guy who's going to play with a talented center or talented wingers wherever he is in the Oilers' top 9. I'm excited to see what he can do over a longer schedule here, more time when he's healthy and kind of go from there. So I really don't have any issue with this contract. There's ways for the Oilers to get out of it if they need to at any point.
Yeah, great analysis on that. I think a lot of it was maybe overblown by outside media, because I feel like it was a lot of outer media that was like kind of like, for the lack of the better term, shitting on the contract. So from an inside perspective like you, I think that's a great analysis. Evan Bouchard got his contract extension. A guy that I think some people were kind of curious what that AAV would finally end up being. Were you happy with that? And how do you feel the next 4 years with Bouch is going to go?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think everybody was hoping for a long-term deal here between the Edmonton Oilers and Evan Bouchard. Shorter term deals for younger defensemen typically haven't gone very well for the Edmonton Oilers in the past. I'm looking at you, Darnell Nurse, with your bridge deal and then the $9.25 million contract that you signed long term. Not blaming Darnell Nurse for getting the bag here. Definitely not doing that. But, you know, the Edmonton Oilers organization really shot themselves in the foot with that one. I mean, if we go back to when that contract was signed, it was really all kicked off by the Oilers trading for Duncan Keith from the Chicago Blackhawks with no salary retained there, right? I mean, if we all look back at it, that's what opened up the ability for them to trade for Seth Jones, sign him to a $9.5 million contract long term. All of a sudden, Zach Werenski signed an extension for $9 million long term with the Columbus Blue Jackets. And then Darnell Nurse is there saying, hey, I'm as good as these guys are right now. Look at the season that I just had in the North Division. And he got the bag. The Oilers really shot themselves in the foot with that whole ordeal there. I think it's a little bit different with Evan Bouchard here. You know, the salary cap is going to be climbing over the next number of years here. You know, $10.5 million is exactly pretty much where I was expecting the number to come in at. Obviously, was hoping for it to be on an 8-year term, but I totally understand the idea of the 4-year contract from the player. You know, Stan Bowman came out and said after the contract was signed that, you know, long-term deal was never really in the cards. It just wasn't something that Bouchard and his agent Dave Gagne were really interested in moving forward with. So, you know, going to walk him right to free agency. Obviously, that's something that's, you know, always a little bit nerve-wracking when you walk one of your own RFAs to free agency like that, especially considering that he's going to be 29 years old, right in the prime of his career. But, you know, he's got 4 years here to really continue to grow in terms of a defenseman in the NHL. You know, he is such a good player, and he's somebody who I think is just incredibly underrated by people within the greater NHL. I mean, you look at his game, and he's such a nonchalant defenseman, and I think that's where a lot of this kind of comes from. There's just no panic in his game ever. Like ever. And there's never really a big sense of urgency either, which is, I think, where some of these kind of narratives come from when you watch him play, because, yeah, like he has his defensive blunders and his defensive mistakes, but he does so many things on the ice that people just don't really recognize. I mean, he's so good at exiting the zone. He's so good at getting himself out of danger when the puck is on his stick, especially in the defensive zone. And he's undoubtedly the best Oilers breakout man in terms of his ability to move the puck up the ice. And it's not necessarily through his legs, because he's not the best skater out there, but his vision and his ability to thread these passes up the ice is what makes him such an excellent defenseman. You know, I looked at the 2024 playoffs as his offensive breakout, right? You know, he sets the NHL record for assists in a single postseason by a defenseman, you know, passing Paul Coffey. And then this year, you know, his offensive game kind of took a little bit of a step back. I think he was kind of a little more focused on playing solid defensive hockey and trying to grow his game there. And I think we saw growth there all season long. And most interestingly, when I kind of look back at this playoff run, especially the one that Bouchard had, his defensive metrics were tremendous in the playoffs this year. Like his numbers were really strong. And this was all without playing alongside Matthias Ekholm. Who is somebody that, you know, people and pundits and people, especially here in Edmonton, have kind of looked at and said, well, you know, Matthias Ekholm makes Evan Bouchard a better defenseman. Evan Bouchard can't play hockey when he's not with Matthias Ekholm. Well, joke's on you guys, because Evan Bouchard proved that he can carry a defensive pairing this year in the playoffs, because the numbers once Matthias Ekholm came back in the final game against the Dallas Stars in the Western Conference Final, Game 5 there, and all throughout the Stanley Cup Finals were not great, and Matthias Ekholm was not on the top of his game, and their underlying numbers were still relatively okay, and that was largely because of Evan Bouchard being able to carry that duo when Ekholm was back.
We got a comment in the chat here that I wanted to get to, and that's from Randy Workman. I'm going to pull it up here. It said, Oilers need a goalie. And I know that when we had you on last month, we talked a little bit about this. And are you surprised that the Oilers haven't fixed that? Or is fixed even the word I should be using for that?
Man. We could talk a lot about this if we really want to here. The truth of the matter and the way that I look at it is this. The Edmonton Oilers have constructed their roster in a very specific way. They have constructed their roster so that they spend as little money on their goaltending department as humanly possible. I think it's like $3.5 million, $4 million between Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard in terms of their combined cap hit right now. The Oilers obviously could have utilized some of the free agency cap space they had here. To go out and sign a goaltender or try and swing a trade, which they certainly tried to do. But the truth of the matter is like, I didn't really look at anybody available on the market this year and say, you know what, this guy is a very clear upgrade over Stuart Skinner. That was the biggest issue for me with this entire free agent class, with this entire, trade class. Even a guy like John Gibson, I'm not entirely convinced is definitively better than Stuart Skinner as an NHL goaltender. The issue with the John Gibson situation was that the Penguins, what's up with Tristan Jarry? Jeff Merrick, DFO guy here, had in his sheet blog earlier this week, does Tristan Jarry make sense as an option for the Edmonton Oilers? And I thought what was interesting too was that Merrick specifically noted that the Pittsburgh Penguins are going to have to pay to move on from Tristan Jarry. So if we talk about a hypothetical trade here for the Edmonton Oilers with the Pittsburgh Penguins, what does paying to get rid of Tristan Jarry look like? Well, okay, you could attach a draft pick or something of the ilk or some kind of a sweetener to take on the remainder of that contract. But if the Pittsburgh Penguins decide that paying for moving out Tristan Jarry is retaining 50% of his salary, well, the Edmonton Oilers can effectively make that fit under their salary cap right now. They have to do some juggling. A guy like Matthias Janmark's going to have to get moved out or waived, sent down to the American League. David Tomasek, another guy who would have to go down to the American League in order to make it work. And obviously Calvin Pickard would be getting sent down as well in that situation too. So, I still think that there could be something there with that. I also kind of look over at Boston and what they've got going on right now. Jeremy Swayman, Jonas Corposalo, and Michael DiPietro. DiPietro waiver eligible this season as well, and a guy that they would likely lose on waivers. So I think there's a couple of situations out there still worth monitoring. At the end of the day, I'm a believer in Stuart Skinner. I think his ceiling is incredibly high, and I think he showed that off in the playoffs here this year. 3-4 shutouts. He had some incredibly great games for the Edmonton Oilers. Problem has been is just like in these biggest moments, especially here against the Florida Panthers in the last 2 years, his game maybe hasn't been where it's needed to be able to get the Oilers through an entire series against the Panthers. Part of that is due to the Panthers being just an absolute powerhouse of a team right now. But I also felt like, especially this year, like the defensive game and the support for Stuart Skinner was just not there in a way that it really needed to be. So I think it's a little bit of a systemic issue, a little bit of a larger issue than just the goaltending. In the same breath, I think there's some options that are out there. And the truth of the matter is the Oilers are going to have $20 million in cap space next summer, give or take, a couple $1,000,000 here or there. And Stuart Skinner and Calvin Pickard are both going to be unrestricted free agents. So it kind of looks like, this next year, this next 12 months is when changes really could happen if the Oilers want to make those moves.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a good way, like more like a trade deadline acquisition, hey? Like kind of ride it out for half the year, see what happens. Tristan Jarry, former Edmonton Oil King, that'd be a fun reunion as well.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, Zach, I want to ask you this too. Jeremiah in the chat there saying he'd rather have Skinner over Jarry. But I want to ask you this here. We've been asking people around the league and pretty much every guest we have on, what is your favorite Oilers jersey?
Like of all time?
Yeah.
Oh, the answer is so easy. It's the McFarland oil drop jersey. That to me is my absolute favorite jersey. Admittedly a little bit biased. It was the first Oilers jersey that I ever had. My Aunt Jackie bought me it when I was a kid. Tommy Salo jersey at the number 35. I've still got it in my closet over here just to the right of me. So that for me is my absolute stone cold deadlock favorite Edmonton Oilers jersey ever.
It's the best answer too. That's my favorite Oilers jersey as well. We just like to ask everybody kind of what their favorite team jersey is, and that's a fantastic answer. Man, they need to bring that back. Like, just bring it back permanently.
I know. Well, they did it in a sense a couple of years ago when they did the reverse retros. So it kind of got revived in a sense, but it still just wasn't the same. there's just something about the look of like the dark blue, the kind of gunmetal silver, and the white that just go together so well. It's just such a
Yeah.
clean jersey. I know, like, anytime I fire up like NHL, whenever I'm playing it on my PlayStation, I always use that jersey. I don't care if I'm playing at home or I'm playing on the road. I'm always wearing that jersey, and it's just such a good look to me. I really wish that they would bring it back in its full and run it as their alternate a couple of times a year. It's just, and the thing is like the people love that jersey here in Edmonton too. Like, I think if you ask any Oilers fan what their favorite jersey is of all time, I think that would be a pretty common answer. It's just an absolute legendary thing around here.
Oh, absolutely. Hey Zach, what do you guys got cooking up at Oilers Nation? What can you kind of tell our viewers?
Yeah, lots of stuff. I mean, we've got a little bit of a later off season here than the rest of our team sites within the network. It was funny, just a couple of days ago, we were having a site managers meeting, and I was saying, oh yeah, we're just getting underway on our player review articles, and everybody else is like, what do you mean you're just getting underway? We did those like 2 months ago. And then everybody's like, oh yeah, right, deep run in the playoffs. So I'm working on that right now. That's always a fun thing that I do every summer. We've got a top prospect countdown that's going to be getting kicked off here towards the end of this month. And then a bigger project that we're actually working on right now, a little bit behind the scenes, top 100 Edmonton Oilers of all time. 10 years ago, one of the writers on our site, Robin Brownlee, who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago now, had did a top 100 article, or top 100 Oilers, where he did an article on the top 100 Edmonton Oilers. So 10 years later, we're bringing that back. And going to look back at some of Robin Brownlee's old content and find some nice ways to honor him.
Right on. That's awesome. That sounds lovely. Hey Zach, thank you so much for joining me today. You guys do fantastic work at Oilers Nation. Keep it up.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Any. That was Zach Laing from the OilersNation.com, boys. Fantastic stuff over there. We're going to bring on Felix Sicard next. He is with the Crash the Pond podcast, and we're going to talk about the Anaheim Ducks for a little bit. So let's bring Felix on. Thanks for joining me today, Felix. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a busy offseason for Anaheim. I don't even know where to begin, but let's go with the draft. What did you make of Roger McQueen getting selected 10th overall?
Yeah, I thought that Roger McQueen at 10th overall was kind of the perfect spot to draft him because of those injury concerns with his back. At 10th overall, it's a lot easier to justify taking the swing. Whereas if they, let's say, had been drafting 7th or 6th, that, there's other options there that are quote unquote safer. So given the rank that they got him at and given the overall upside of his game with his size and his skill and his hockey sense, it's a pretty solid pick at 10. And then moving down the list a little bit, I really like Eric Nilsson, who they picked up in the 2nd round, Emile Guité in the 5th round for the Ducks as well, is a guy who I'm intrigued by just because he was someone who was once highly touted and had a bit of a rough draft year. So maybe he'll bounce back. So overall, it's a fun draft, I think. The more I've dived into it, the more I've kind of become a fan of it.
Do you think that there is a shot at all? Now, this is a loaded question, but for Roger McQueen to make the opening night lineup?
I think it's very unlikely. I think that it's possible that they give him a cameo if he has a great training camp and he really shines in camp. But I think that they've got another guy in Beckett Seneca who is kind of vying for that kid spot basically. And if Seneca and I think Seneca has the inside track to that, but I'm sure that if they see Roger McQueen play really well in camp, and in preseason, they're gonna say, yeah, we want to reward him for that. But ultimately, he's not going to spend the year with the Ducks. I will bet the house against that because he's a guy who missed almost the entire year in the WHL. He needs time to kind of get his body and his timing and his pace back, and I think that that's the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Beckett Seneca for a quick second. We're going back to that draft pick, were you as surprised as maybe other people were, or no?
No, I wasn't surprised. I thought that they were going to take him if they were going to take a forward, but I think that he's not, I had other players ahead of him that I would have drafted if I were in that chair. Like, I really liked Caden Lindstrom despite the injury concerns, and of course Ivan Demidov. So it was so from that perspective, it's not the pick I would have made, but I totally understand why they made the pick they did. At his size, with the potential upside that he has, the kind of untapped potential, especially as someone who really improved throughout the season in his draft year. The Ducks love guys like that. They love guys who have the physical tools, who have the hockey sense, and who have a lot of runway still. And I think Leo Carlsson, Beckett Seneca, and now Roger McQueen, they all fit into that size, skill, and upside kind of profile.
Oh, the way you just laid that out, it made a lot of sense for me. Like that's a great little like prospect pool that they got going on there.
It's not bad. Yeah.
Stian Solberg, or Stian, I'm not too sure how to pronounce the first name, but Norwegian defenseman. I'm a big fan of him. You'd think I would know how to pronounce his name properly, but what do you make of him?
Yeah, so just for your own future reference, I believe it is Stian. So you had it there. You were 1 for 2. But yeah, I really like him. I mean, he's a guy who I didn't really watch much of at all when he was over in Europe this season. But when he came over to the AHL, I did watch a few of his games, and I thought that he looked really good right away. And that's not something that I expected. And, his game seems really suited for the smaller North American ice. His physicality is, it's not something that for me personally in prospects I care that much about, but his physicality is an asset because he actually, he kills plays by just shoving guys out of the way, slamming them into the boards, but he's also got that ability to make a great first pass. I think he moves pretty well, and also he's got a little bit of offense from the blue line, not the highest like hockey sense offensively, but he can get around, he can make some passes, and he's got a good shot as well. So, I mean, he's another guy who they got later in the first round, but he could, if all goes right for him, he could become a top 4 defenseman as well.
What do you make of the Chris Kreider trade?
Boy, that's a loaded question. I've had a lot of arguments about this online, as I tend to do. That's kind of my hobby, I guess. So I'll start with this. Chris Kreider is a really good player, but he's old, and he's coming off a injury-riddled season, and there's a question mark there of what is he going to be. Now, the Ducks paid basically nothing to get him. Carey Torrance is an okay prospect, but nothing, not a blue chip. And then they gave him a draft pick as well. So the Ducks took on that full cap hit, which, they kind of did the Rangers a favor there, but they also didn't pay much of anything for it. So if Chris Kreider gets anywhere close to where he was prior to last season, he could be a huge addition for the Ducks. He could be something that really moves the needle for them, especially as a power play guy. But he's also going to be away from that Rangers environment, the Artemi Panarins, Mika Zibanejads. And so it'll be just interesting to see how he performs outside of that. But on the flip side, if Father Time kind of continues to wear on him, it's possible that he just kind of maybe is more of a 20-ish goal scorer who doesn't necessarily drive play. So my guess is that I think he'll be fine for them. I think he'll help. But anyone expecting like 40 to 50 goals, it's just a lot. It's a lot to expect from a guy at that age.
Absolutely, it is. Another trade that I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, was inevitable. But Trevor Zegras, what did you make of him going to Philly?
So for Trevor Zegras, I really love that trade because I think that, getting to play with Matvei Mishkov and just getting to be part of what the Flyers are building up front. And I think the freedom that they're going to afford him playing at center is really going to help him, because in Anaheim, he really got stifled getting moved to the wing. They really, really hammered home that he had to improve as a defensive player, which he did, but I think that it really took away from his offense, and he just wasn't playing his natural position. So for him, I love it. For the Ducks, I don't love it. I think that they really, first off, they sold low on him. He's coming off 2 injury-riddled seasons where he didn't put up much production. They got Ryan Poehling, a fourth-line center, and a pick. Like, it's just, they were never going to get anything much for him at that time because his value was so low. And also they chose to trade him right before free agency started. So you're down a top 6 forward when it's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to necessarily fill that hole. So it was risky. I just think that Pat Verbeek at the end of the day did not really like Trevor Zegras as a player. I just don't think that he was the kind of guy that he wanted to build his team around. And that's his prerogative, but I think he's wrong about that. I think Trevor Zegras is a really good player who, has some warts, but if you put him in the right environment, can be a game breaker. So all in all, I give that move a thumbs down for the Ducks and a thumbs up for Trevor Zegras.
Good change of scenery for him for sure. But it did seem like that his relationship with Verbeek had fizzled out and just gotten to a point where he, wasn't very liked. At least from an outside perspective, it seemed that way.
Yeah, I think that, I just don't think that they necessarily bought into him as a player. And at the end of the day, like that's what was driving all of this, is that, he had the playmaking, the highlight skill, but Verbeek wants to build a team around guys who are physical, can skate, are big, and also have the skill. And Zegras doesn't check many of those Verbeek boxes. And so I don't know, as far as like the off-ice personality or whatever, but just on ice, I just don't think that he was a guy that they were sold on. I think that they were happy with some of the progress that he made in his game, but he was still a guy who was always going to be on eggshells with the team.
John Gibson, another longtime Anaheim Duck, gets shipped out. What do you make of that? Because I feel like that was another one that's just been brewing for a couple years, really.
Yeah, so I think that one, it's a little different because I think that although trading John Gibson on paper just makes the team worse, there's just no question. Gibson was great last year, and a tandem of Dostal and Gibson is one of the best goalie tandems in the league. But I think that it's tough because the Ducks really didn't get much for him. They got Peter Mrazek to kind of fill that spot, but they still have Ville Husso in there who they gave a 2-year deal to. So they didn't really do that great in the trade, especially because part of it is that they were just completely unwilling to retain salary, and so that lowered the return. But they did clear up cap room for next year, which matters. But I think ultimately John Gibson just wanted out. And at a certain point, I think that they probably just wanted to make that happen for everybody involved. It's just like, let's kind of get this over with. I don't know that for a fact, but that's just kind of what it seems like, because on paper, that move doesn't help the team.
Would you say that would have been the same sentiment for Cam Fowler?
I think Fowler is you could draw a little bit of a comparison there for sure. I think that with Fowler, it was similar in that there was maybe a little bit of a want of a change of scenery, and also just the fact that the Ducks have so many young defensemen that need to play. Now that still was an issue even after they traded Fowler because they got Jacob Trouba, so the logjam didn't really get fixed. But with Gibson, it was the same, where it's like Gibson wanted to be a starter, and actually apparently that was part of the reason he didn't want to go to Edmonton at the deadline, is he didn't want to share the net with Skinner. And in Anaheim, he was going to have to share the net with Dostal because Dostal is too good to be a 30-game backup. So, I think that I hadn't actually thought about that, but that is an interesting comparison for sure.
Okay. Speaking of the logjam in defense, a guy I was DMing you about this morning, Olin Zellweger. So I had the chance to watch him for a total of 50 games when he came here to Kamloops and was traded for a haul of draft picks.
Yeah, I remember that.
One of the biggest trades in the CHL at the time. We joked around here among the staff that he was like a rover out there on the ice, just absolutely everywhere. What have you made of Zellweger's? Just what have you made of him in Anaheim so far, and where do you see his ceiling?
Yeah, so I think that the Olin Zellweger that you saw in the CHL hasn't really popped off, hasn't really appeared in the NHL yet. And I don't think that that's Olin Zellweger's fault. I think that, that the Ducks really wanted him, because he's a smaller guy. And remember, Pat Verbeek loves size. He loves the bigger players. And I think that last year, I thought he looked okay in camp. They sent him down to the AHL, and he shined in the AHL. He was really good, and I think that the Zellweger that you're describing in Kamloops, like he was there. He was making plays. He was roving around, but he was also responsible defensively. He was an AHL All-Star. And then they call him up, and at the end of that season, this is 2 years ago now, he plays well. And then at the start of this year, it looks like he's primed to take a huge leap forward and really cement himself. And instead, with the moves that they made, bringing in Trouba, shipping out Fowler, they had Dumoulin at the time, he was a guy who didn't really get into the lineup that frequently. And when he did, they really asked him to be something that he wasn't, that he was kind of this really vanilla defenseman, chipping pucks out off the glass, not taking many risks with the puck, not making a lot of plays at the offensive blue line. They really wanted to kind of beat it into him that he had to be this safer defenseman. And I think that, yes, to a degree, all defensemen need to learn that, right? You need to learn to play the right way and to not cost your team. But I look at what Lane Hudson did in Montreal, and I think that if you gave Zellweger that same green light, he could have had, I don't know if he would have had 60-something points, but he could have been very effective offensively and probably doesn't cost you much defensively either. So I'm a little curious what's next for him, because apparently there were some rumblings behind the scenes about, him being unhappy with not getting to play. And this year, like that could be an issue again. We'll see. So I'm a big Olin Zellweger fan, and I just want him to be happy. So wherever that happens, I'm a fan of.
Absolutely. I think, with the log jam in Anaheim and the size comparison there, I think that, that is hindering him a bit for sure. If you can, just take the leash off him and let him do what he is able to do, you've got yourself a fantastic defenseman. But it's only, when that's going to happen. Another defenseman that has become a fan favorite is Jackson Lacombe. What have you made of Lacombe? Because he has become a very solid defenseman in the NHL and somebody that is being talked about among a lot of people.
Yeah, so it's interesting because when Jackson Lacombe was coming up as a prospect, and even the year prior to last year, I didn't really think that much of him. I just thought that he could move well. He had some offense to his game. He could skate, he could make plays, but it was just, he looked like he was going to be a fine NHL defenseman. And then this year, as a 24-year-old, he really broke out. He started off the season kind of rough. He had some really just brutal mistakes that cost the team games. But then as the season wore on, he gained his confidence. He just kind of became a stud. I mean, he was so good defending the blue line, moving the puck, making plays, carrying the puck up ice. He had all the confidence in the world. And I think I really wonder what's next, because this is such a huge leap for him. And I'm not saying that he's not this player, but I'm wondering, is there another step that's coming, or is this kind of what he's going to be? Because if this is what it's going to be, he's going to be great. But if he gets any better, he's going to be like an all-star. He's going to be an elite defenseman. So really happy for him, though, because he's a guy who I think really cares about kind of the craft of the game. But, and again, this is nothing to take away from Jackson Lacombe, but I think when I compare him as a 24-year-old to the 21-year-olds with Minchikov and Zellweger, I think he was just given more of a leash. He was given more of a green light to play through mistakes, and I think that that's healthy. I just wish that had been given to everybody else as well. But he earned it, and he's great. So no issues for me.
Let's go to the net for a quick second here, because Lucas Dostal obviously signed his 5-year extension yesterday. What do you make of that? Obviously, you've already kind of said you're a big fan of him. He doesn't deserve to play just 30 games. He's a starting goalie. But with Gibson out, it seems like Dostal is now officially the guy to go forward. What do you think the expectations are of him for this season?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because he was one of the best goalies in the NHL last year. He came out with just a torrid pace. He was so good in the first couple months of the season when John Gibson was out. And then when John Gibson came back, his playing time kind of became a little more spotty. Sometimes there was like a week that would go by where he wouldn't get a start. And I don't know this for sure, but I feel like it kind of maybe messed with his rhythm, his timing. Goalies crave that routine. They want that predictability. And I think for him, I don't know, maybe it threw him off because his numbers as the season went on were still great, but they ticked down a little bit. And it's hard to keep up what he was doing in the first couple months. But so I think going into this season, he did play 54 games last year, but I'm curious now, 54 games this season where he is absolutely the starter, not 54 games kind of interspersed throughout the season with stops and starts. I'm curious how he's going to handle that. I wouldn't expect him to be a Vezina guy right away next season, but I think if he's allowed to he's going to get those 50 plus games. He's going to be a great NHL goalie. He's going to be above average, probably elite. He's really the one thing on this team. He's the one thing on this team that I have absolutely no doubts about.
That's good though. You want that.
You want that in goalie. Yeah,
absolutely. Hey Felix, my last question for you: what is your favorite Anaheim Ducks jersey that they've ever worn?
Oh wow, you're opening a can of worms. I hope you know that. I don't know if this is a trap question, but no. I mean, my favorite jersey, let me just think about this for a second. My favorite jersey ever, I mean, it's got to be the original. Like, it's got to be the original. I think that the original white Mighty Ducks jersey is very difficult to beat. I think that when they did the anniversary version of it in 2013 with that kind of newer like Reebok look, it looked great. The eggplant version. I was also kind of a fan of the jerseys they had kind of in that right after they won the Stanley Cup, the black and gold. But yeah, I mean the original jersey is kind of like the only right answer, to be honest.
It's so iconic, right?
I don't know what your take on that is. I'm curious to hear that.
I think mine would be the same, right? Like it's got to be the eggplant one. Like,
what do you think of the new ones? Is my question.
I like them. I actually do like them. Now, the only thing I would say though is I was surprised that they don't have like an eggplant style look to them, because I get the orange because Orange County. Don't worry, I understand this.
Yeah, but they made that pretty clear. Yeah,
but like you would think that they would have, the original colors in there somewhere. I don't know. That's just my thought.
I think that eventually there will be a third jersey that's eggplant and jade. But they're printing money with that, just with the apparel at the team store. So, and I think that they know that the fans want it. So at some point, I think there's going to be an alternate with those colors.
That'd be fantastic. We actually have a question from the chat here. I just want to get to quickly from Jeremiah Maxwell. He says that the original is awesome. He loves the eggplant. But what about Mason McTavish? So we've heard Frank Saravalli. We've heard a few other people kind of around the league talking about McTavish. What are you hearing?
Well, I don't have any like inside information on this, but what I can say is when you put together the totality of Pat Verbeek's time negotiating with higher profile restricted free agents, and so I'm lumping in like a Troy Terry, Trevor Zegras, Jamie Drysdale, like he's a tough negotiator. He's hard on guys, and I think it's very possible that that's exactly what's happening with Mason McTavish right now. I think that, you know, Pat Verbeek has said he prefers bridge deals. And if you're Mason McTavish, maybe that's not what you want. Maybe that what you want is actually a long-term deal. I think that in a way, it's actually better for the player to get a bridge deal, because then they have their UFA years all still available to them. But on the flip side, there's kind of this badge of honor with young players of, hey, like as soon as you're up, you get your 8x8, or now whatever it would be, your 7x8. So there's probably some friction there. I'm sure that there's something that's going on there, because there's too many rumors going around, and that means people are talking behind the scenes. Does that mean that the Ducks are actually looking to trade him? Does that mean that he's actually going to get an offer sheet that he would then sign, that the Ducks then wouldn't match? Like, I don't know if any of that is actually how valid that is, but I have no problem believing that this has been a tough grind for Mason McTavish in negotiations. I like him as a player. I think that they kind of need to make this work, because as much as I like Roger McQueen, like if you trade McTavish now, you're out of your second line center. And then what? Like, yeah, you have Mikael Granlund, but so we'll see what happens there. I don't want to put too much kind of fuel on the fire, but I would say it's very plausible that things have been tough in that negotiation.
All right. Hey, Felix. Yeah, the Ducks signed Drew Helleson as well. 2 more years. As we kind of wrap things up here, where can everyone find your work?
Yeah, so just go to Twitter, search Crash the Pond. That's the podcast I do with my good buddy Jake every week, covering the Ducks, talking Ducks prospects. So check that out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today, Felix. Take care.
Thanks.
That was a great episode. We had Zach Laing from the Oilers Nation Boys, and then Felix Sicard from Crash the Pond. Great chatting with the both of them. Before we wrap up here, we'll just quickly throw it to a quick ad break, and then I will wrap up the show and tell you about who's coming on Monday.
Looking for a new way to quench your thirst? Game Day Tarps is now an official Quench affiliate. Head on over to quench.ca/GameDayTarps podcast and use our code GameDayTarpsPodcast, all caps, all one word, for 15% off your total order. Stay cool this summer with the #1 sports drink on the market. Stay quenched.
Is the off-season bumming you out?
Yeah.
Do you wish you had more hockey content to consume?
Yeah.
Well, head on over to patreon.com/GameDayTarps and check out all the exclusive content we have to offer. Behind the scenes videos, in-depth analysis, and so much more. Select a membership tier and enjoy the content made only for you. Only at patreon.com/GameDayTarps.
There's
Colton, how's it going?
Aiden. Good, how are you?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. I've been pumping out some graphics behind the scenes, fellas, for work tomorrow. But yeah, we're here. We're getting it done. I want to know. Drop a comment down in the chat. Sorry, Colton. Do you guys like this this moving background that I made? Is it better than just the plain old logo in the background? I don't know. Let me know in the comments.
Good stuff today. Monday, we have Eric Erlinson, Tampa Bay Lightning insider, as he's known, or Bolts in Lightning Insider. That's what he's known as on Twitter. Eric has been a beat writer for Tampa Bay for 20 plus years. One of my favorite writers in the league. So we're going to have him on the show Monday, chat all things Tampa Bay. So really looking forward to that. I already dropped it yesterday, but we will have Carter Bear on the show next week. So looking forward to that one as well for all you Red Wings and Silver Tips fans. So some fun stuff next week for us, but big thank you to Zach and to Felix for popping on the show today.
Yes, sir. What do you got planned for the weekend, Colton?
What is it? I gotta do some stuff for the Blazers. I got a bit of work I gotta do for them. So A couple articles I'm going to kind of work on some graphics and stuff for Daily Face-Off, but that's about it.
Nice. Sounds like you're doing the exact same thing I am for the weekend, doing some graphics and a little bit of nothing.
Yeah, a little bit of R&R time.
Yeah. Well, everyone, hello from me, but also goodbye from us. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you Monday, same time, right back here on GDT Live.